Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I'm in my mid-30s. What I'm going to share with you today is the story of how my family tried to brand my pain as just drama, how they dismissed my feelings and twisted my reality, and how I eventually took that pain and turned it into my purpose. If you've ever felt like your emotions were being invalidated by the people who were supposed to love you most, or if you've been told you're too sensitive or overreacting when you were just expressing legitimate hurt, then you might find parts of my story resonating with you. I know how isolating that can feel. Let me know in the comments below where you're watching from today, and if you connect with that feeling of being dismissed, please hit the like button so I know I'm not alone in this experience. Also, consider subscribing to my channel for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and finding your voice. It's a story that spans many years, built layer by layer, but there was a specific period that brought everything to a head, a series of events that forced me to finally confront the truth of my family relationships, even when that truth was painful and lonely. It's about realizing that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most, not with malice, but through their own inability or unwillingness to see you clearly. And it's about the difficult, often heartbreaking process of setting boundaries, finding your truth, and building a life where your feelings are not only valid, but are the foundation of your strength. Growing up, my family was complicated. On the surface, we were functional, even happy. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, the usual milestones. But beneath the veneer, there was an undercurrent of emotional manipulation, a subtle but constant rewriting of reality, particularly by my mother and my older sister. I was the youngest, the sensitive one, and I learned early on that my feelings were often inconvenient, disruptive, or simply wrong. My mother had a way of making everything about her, even when it wasn't. A simple disagreement could escalate into her feeling personally attacked, withdrawing affection, and leaving me to apologize for a perceived slight I didn't understand. My sister, Sarah, was the golden child, the practical, logical one, and she quickly adopted my mother's methods, adding her own layer of dismissiveness. If I expressed frustration or sadness about something, especially something they had done or said, it was immediately framed as, "You're being dramatic, Rebecca," or "Why do you always make such a big deal out of everything?" I remember one specific incident when I was in high school. I had been really excited about a school trip, something I had worked hard to save money for. At the last minute, my mother decided she needed that money for something else, a non-essential purchase she suddenly felt was urgent. When I cried and expressed my disappointment, she didn't apologize or acknowledge my feelings. Instead, she sighed heavily, looked at Sarah, and said, "Oh, here we go. The drama queen is making an appearance." Sarah just rolled her eyes. I felt a hot wave of shame wash over me. My genuine sadness wasn't seen as valid. It was labeled drama, a performance intended to manipulate them, rather than a real emotional response to a real loss. This pattern repeated itself countless times. If I was upset because someone had hurt me, I was told I was overreacting. If I needed emotional support, I was told I was being needy. If I tried to explain why I felt a certain way, my words were twisted, my intentions questioned, and the conversation would inevitably turn back to how I was the problem, how I was creating conflict. My reality was constantly being challenged, undermined, and redefined by the people who were supposed to be my safe harbor. Over time, this took a massive toll on me. I started to believe them. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I did overreact. Maybe my feelings weren't reliable indicators of truth. I became incredibly insecure, hesitant to express myself, constantly second-guessing my own perceptions and emotions. I developed a deep-seated anxiety and a pervasive sense of shame about simply existing. I learned to minimize my needs, hide my hurt, and present a version of myself that was agreeable, quiet, and caused no ripples. College offered a brief respite. I moved away, made friends who validated my experiences, and started to see glimpses of what healthy relationships looked like. But the gravitational pull of family is strong, and I would fall back into old patterns when I returned home for visits or when they called. The dynamics hadn't changed. If anything, Distance seemed to amplify their perception of me as distant and difficult, further solidifying their narrative of me as the one who caused problems. The situation escalated significantly after I graduated and moved back to my hometown for a few years to save money. Living in closer proximity meant more interaction, and more interaction meant more opportunities for the toxic patterns to play out. I was trying to build my career, navigate early adulthood, and also process the years of invalidation I had experienced. It was a vulnerable time, and instead of support, I was met with increased criticism and control. My mother would frequently call, not to check in on me, but to subtly or not so subtly criticize my choices, my job, my friends, my apartment, my appearance. Sarah would join in, offering unsolicited advice framed as concern, which always felt like judgment. If I defended myself or expressed that their comments were hurtful, the familiar refrain would begin. "Rebecca, why are you getting so upset?" Or, "We're just trying to help. Stop being so defensive." Or the ultimate weapon, "You're making such drama out of nothing." One particularly painful instance involved a significant career opportunity one was pursuing. It was a job I was really excited about, a step up that I felt proud of. I shared the news with my family, hoping for encouragement. Instead, my mother immediately found reasons why it was a bad idea. It was too far, the company wasn't stable, based on zero research. I wasn't ready for that much responsibility. Sarah chimed in, agreeing with my mother and adding her own doubts about whether I was cut out for that kind of pressure. I was devastated. Not by their doubts, necessarily, but by the lack of belief, the immediate assumption of failure, the way they sucked the joy out of my achievement. I tried to explain how much this job meant to me, how hard I had worked. I told them their negativity was hurting me. And that's when it happened, the moment that crystallized their perspective for me. My mother leaned back, folded her arms, and with a look of weary exasperation, she said, "Honestly, Rebecca, you are so dramatic. We're just being realistic. It's not our fault you can't handle honest feedback without turning it into some big production." Sarah nodded in agreement. Some big production, my dreams, my hard work, my legitimate hurt at their lack of support. It was all reduced to drama, a performance I was putting on. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The shame was still there, but it was joined by a flicker of fierce indignation. They genuinely believed that I manufactured my emotional responses for attention or manipulation, rather than acknowledging that their actions were the cause of my distress. It was easier for them to label me as dramatic than to confront the possibility that they were being hurtful or unsupportive. I mumbled something about needing to leave and got out of there as quickly as possible. I drove around for hours, tears streaming down my face, the words so dramatic echoing in my head. But this time, instead of sinking into self-pity and believing them, I started to question their reality. Was I really being dramatic? Or was I having a perfectly normal, human reaction to feeling unsupported and criticized by my own family? I talked to a trusted friend that night, pouring out everything that had happened. She listened patiently, didn't interrupt, didn't offer quick fixes. When I finished, she simply said, "Rebecca, that sounds incredibly painful. It makes complete sense that you're upset. What they said was cruel, and it wasn't fair." Hearing those words, "It makes complete sense that you're upset," was like a lifeline. It was the first time in a long time that someone had validated my emotional experience in relation to my family. It felt revolutionary. It started a slow, arduous process of unpacking years of invalidation and gaslighting. I began therapy shortly after this incident, specifically to address the complex trauma of growing up in that environment. Therapy was invaluable. My therapist helped me understand the dynamics at play, the emotional immaturity, the defensiveness, the projection. She helped me see that my feelings were not the problem. The problem was their response to my feelings. She validated my experiences and helped me rebuild my trust in my own perceptions. I learned about boundaries, about the right to have my feelings, and about the fact that I wasn't responsible for managing other people's discomfort with my authenticity. Armed with this new understanding and a growing sense of self-worth, I realized I couldn't continue interacting with my family in the same way. The job opportunity incident was just one example of a pervasive pattern. Every interaction felt like navigating a minefield, constantly anticipating the criticism, the dismissal, the labeling of my feelings as drama. I decided I needed to set boundaries. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting myself. It was about creating a space where my emotional well-being wasn't constantly under attack. My therapist helped me figure out what those boundaries should look like and how to communicate them. It was terrifying. I knew, deep down, that setting boundaries would likely provoke the very reaction I was trying to avoid. They would see it as more drama, more evidence that I was difficult. But I also knew I couldn't go on living like this. I started small. I stopped immediately defending myself when they criticized me. Instead, I would simply say, "I understand you see it that way," or "That's not how I experience it." I would end phone calls that became critical or dismissive by saying, "I'm not comfortable continuing this conversation right now," and politely hanging up. I started declining invitations to events where I knew the dynamic would be particularly fraught. Predictably, these small steps were met with resistance. My mother would call back immediately after I hung up, demanding to know why I was being so rude. Sarah would text me, accusing me of being cold and ungrateful. The chorus of "You're being dramatic" and "Why are you making such a big deal out of everything" intensified. The pressure built over several months. Every boundary I tried to set was met with pushback and accusations. It felt like I was fighting a losing battle, constantly having to justify my right to emotional safety. The stress was immense. I was still working hard at my new job, trying to build a life, and simultaneously dealing with this constant barrage of negativity from my family. Then came the event that served as the painful, dramatic climax of this period. It was a family gathering, a seemingly innocuous birthday celebration for a relative. I hesitated to go, anticipating the tension, but I felt obligated. I told myself I would go, be polite, stay for a short time and leave. I arrived feeling anxious, but determined to maintain my composure and my boundaries. Everything seemed okay at first. Small talk, cake, the usual family chaos. But as the evening wore on, the familiar dynamic started to emerge. My mother made a subtly critical comment about my appearance. Sarah joined in, making a joke about my career choice in front of other relatives. It wasn't malicious, not overtly, but it was the insidious, chipping away kind of criticism I had become so used to. Usually I would shrink, force a smile, or try to change the subject. But something in me snapped that night. Perhaps it was the cumulative effect of years of this. Perhaps it was the strength I had gained in therapy. Perhaps it was just exhaustion. Whatever it was, I couldn't do it anymore. My mother said something about how I was always so serious and needed to lighten up, implying my seriousness was a personal failing rather than a reflection of the circumstances or just my personality. Sarah laughed along. I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, my hands were trembling, but my voice was steady. "You know," I said, looking directly at my mother and then Sarah, "maybe I seem serious because it's hard to be lighthearted when I constantly feel judged and criticized by the two of you." Silence fell over the small group we were talking with. Everyone turned to look at me. My mother's smile froze. Sarah's eyes widened. "What are you talking about, Rebecca?" my mother said, her voice tight. "We don't judge you. We love you." "You do," I countered, my voice gaining a little strength. "Every time I try to talk about something that's important to me, you find a way to criticize it. Every time I express how I feel, I'm told I'm too sensitive or being dramatic. That's judgment. That's not support." Sarah quickly jumped in. "Oh my God, Rebecca, not here. You are literally making a scene. This is exactly what Mom means. You always have to create drama." "I'm not creating drama, Sarah," I said, my voice rising slightly, tears starting to well up, but I refused to let them fall. "I'm stating how your behavior makes me feel. Why is it drama when I talk about my feelings, but it's just being realistic when you criticize me?" My mother stood up abruptly. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said, her face flushed with anger. "On Aunt Carol's birthday. You are unbelievable, Rebecca. You always have to be the center of attention with your problems." We try so hard with you, and this is how you repay us? By attacking us in front of everyone. Other relatives were now openly watching, some looking uncomfortable, others appearing sympathetic. I felt exposed, terrified, but also a strange sense of clarity. This was it. This was the pattern, playing out in real time, in front of witnesses. My attempt to express my legitimate pain was being reframed as an attack, as attention-seeking drama, as me being the difficult, ungrateful one. "I'm not attacking you," I said, my voice now clearer, stronger, cutting through my fear. "I'm telling you the truth about how your words and actions affect me. And if you can't hear that without getting angry and accusing me of causing problems, then maybe that's not my problem. Maybe that's yours." This was a radical statement for me. I had never dared to suggest that they might be the ones with the issue, not me. My mother recoiled as if I had struck her. "How dare you speak to your mother like that?" she exclaimed. "After everything we've done for you." "I appreciate what you've done," I said, acknowledging their efforts genuinely, because I didn't want to be unfair. "But that doesn't give you the right to treat me this way now. And it doesn't invalidate my feelings about how I've been treated." Sarah stepped towards me, her face stern. "You need to stop this, Rebecca. You're ruining the party. You're upset about nothing, just like always. You need to grow up and stop being such a child." "I am grown up, Sarah," I said, holding her gaze. "And part of being grown up is understanding that dismissing someone's feelings isn't okay, especially when they're hurting because of your actions. I'm not making this up. I'm not being dramatic. I'm hurting. And I'm telling you that the way you talk to me is a big part of why." My mother, seeing she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted, me caving and apologizing, shifted tactics slightly. "We just worry about you, Rebecca," she said, her voice taking on a falsely sweet, concerned tone that I recognized instantly as manipulative. "You're so sensitive, and you struggle so much. We just want to help you navigate life." "My struggles aren't caused by me being inherently flawed or too sensitive," I stated, finding the courage to voice a truth I had only recently articulated to myself. "A lot of my struggles, particularly with my self-worth and anxiety, come from feeling like I was never good enough, never doing things right, and having my feelings constantly invalidated by the two of you." The air in the room felt thick with tension. My mother's face hardened. Sarah looked furious. Other family members were awkwardly looking away or exchanging worried glances. "That's a terrible thing to say," my mother whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "To blame your own mother for your problems. That's incredibly unfair." "It's not blame," I said, my voice softer now, weary but resolute. "It's the truth. It's my truth. And I'm not going to pretend anymore that everything is fine when it's not. I'm not going to let you call my pain drama just because you're uncomfortable with it." I looked around at the faces watching me, then back at my mother and Sarah. "I love you both," I said, and I meant it, despite everything. It was a complicated, painful love. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being told my feelings aren't real. I need space. I need time to figure things out without this constant judgment. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked across the room, gathered my coat, and left the party. I could feel their eyes on my back the whole way out. The silence I left in my wake felt deafening. The immediate aftermath was exactly what I had anticipated, but somehow still painful to endure. The phone calls and texts started almost immediately. My mother was distraught, heartbroken. How could I do this to her? Sarah was angry, accusing me of being selfish, destructive, and intentionally hurtful. Other family members, influenced by my mother and Sarah's version of events, reached out to tell me I had been out of line, that I owed my mother an apology, that I had caused unnecessary drama and ruined a perfectly good family event. Their narrative was clear and unified. I was the villain. I was the one who had chosen to create conflict, to dredge up ancient history, to attack my innocent family, all because I was too sensitive and liked attention. My legitimate feelings and my attempt to set boundaries were entirely reframed as malicious behavior on my part. The drama queen label was applied with full force. For a few days, I wavered. The isolation was intense. The weight of their disapproval and the accusations from other relatives felt crushing. Was I wrong? Had I gone too far? The years of programming, the years of believing their version of reality, made it hard to hold on to my truth. But then I remembered the conversation with my therapist, the validation from my friend, and the quiet certainty I had felt in that moment at the party when I spoke my truth. I remembered how exhausted I was from pretending, from minimizing myself, from constantly battling the feeling that I was fundamentally flawed. I reread notes from my therapy sessions. I talked to my trusted friend again. I journaled extensively, documenting the specific instances of invalidation and dismissal over the years. I replayed the conversation at the party, analyzing their reactions not as evidence of my wrongness, but as confirmation of the toxic dynamic I had been trying to escape. Their inability to hear my pain without turning it back on me, their immediate defensiveness and counter-accusations, their need to control the narrative and make me the villain, it all fit the pattern perfectly. I decided not to engage with the barrage of accusatory messages. I stopped answering their calls. It was incredibly difficult, and it felt like mourning a loss, the loss of the family I had wished I had, the loss of the relationship I had always longed for. There was a profound sadness in realizing that the reconciliation and understanding I had secretly hoped for after speaking my truth was not going to happen, at least not in the way I had imagined. They weren't capable of hearing my truth because it challenged their own self-perception too deeply. This period of intense isolation and processing lasted for several months. It was painful, lonely, and filled with doubt, but it was also strangely liberating. For the first time, I wasn't expending all my energy trying to manage their expectations, deflect their criticism, or prove my worthiness. I was simply existing, feeling my feelings, and focusing on rebuilding myself. I continued therapy, which became my anchor. I focused on my job, finding success and validation there. I nurtured the healthy friendships in my life, appreciating the people who saw and accepted me for who I was. I started exploring hobbies I had put aside, reclaiming parts of myself that had been suppressed. Slowly, incrementally, the pain of being labeled dramatic began to transform. It was still a source of hurt, a scar from years of emotional invalidation. But it also became a marker of resilience. They called my authentic emotional expression drama because it was uncomfortable for them. My willingness to feel deeply, to react honestly, to yearn for genuine connection and understanding, these weren't flaws, they were integral parts of me. They were features, not bugs. I started to see that the very things they criticized, my sensitivity, my emotional depth, my refusal to pretend everything was okay, were actually sources of strength. My sensitivity allowed me to empathize deeply with others. My emotional depth allowed me to connect authentically. My refusal to accept the status quo, even when it was difficult, was a sign of my integrity and my growing self-respect. The label drama wasn't a reflection of me. It was a reflection of their inability to handle uncomfortable truths and genuine emotion. It was a way to shut me down, to silence my voice, to maintain control. And by speaking my truth, by refusing to be silenced, I had broken free from that control. I realized that my experience wasn't unique. So many people, particularly women, are told they are too emotional, too sensitive, or dramatic when they express feelings or boundaries that challenge the comfort or control of others. I saw that this was a common tactic of manipulation and invalidation. And that's where the purpose started to emerge. My pain, my struggle to be seen and heard, my journey through invalidation and towards self-acceptance felt like something I needed to share. I wanted to let others who had experienced similar things know that they weren't alone, that their feelings were valid, and that they didn't have to accept the labels others tried to put on them. I started writing about my experiences, first in a private journal, then tentatively sharing parts of my story in online support groups focused on complex family dynamics. The response was overwhelming. People resonated with my words, sharing their own stories of being dismissed, gaslight, and labeled as dramatic. It was validating and incredibly healing to connect with others who understood. This led me to think about how I could share my story more widely, how I could use my experience to help others feel less alone and more empowered. That's part of what brought me here, to sharing my story on this platform. My purpose became about taking the very pain that was inflicted upon me and turning it into a message of validation and hope for others. My relationship with my mother and sister is different now. It's minimal. After months of silence, there were tentative attempts to reconnect, but they were always predicated on me accepting their version of reality and apologizing for the drama I had caused. I was unwilling to do that. I wasn't asking for an apology for the past, but I needed acknowledgement and a commitment to change the dynamic moving forward. That wasn't offered. We have very limited contact now. Brief, superficial conversations a few times a year. There's a sadness there, a grief for the relationship I wished we could have had. But there's also a profound sense of peace. I am no longer walking on eggshells. I am no longer bracing myself for criticism or invalidation. My home is a safe space where my feelings are real and accepted. My chosen family, my friends, my partner, see me and value me completely. It wasn't an easy path. It required immense courage to speak my truth, especially when I knew the backlash would be severe. It required strength to withstand the isolation that followed. It required dedication to my own healing through therapy and self-reflection. There were days I wanted to give up, days I questioned everything. But looking back, I wouldn't trade the lessons I learned. The pain of being branded dramatic forced me to question who I was, whose reality I was living in, and what I truly needed to be happy and healthy. It pushed me to seek validation not from the people who couldn't give it, but from within myself and from those who truly saw me. Turning that pain into purpose has been the most empowering part of my journey. By sharing my story, by connecting with others, by advocating for the right to have and express authentic emotions, I've found a sense of meaning that transcends the hurt. I've taken their label, drama, and redefined it. My drama wasn't attention-seeking. It was my soul crying out for recognition and respect. It was my truth fighting to be heard. And in finding my voice, I found my purpose. It's still a process, healing and growing. There are moments when old insecurities surface, particularly around family events or when I feel criticized. But now I have the tools and the self-awareness to navigate those moments. I can identify the toxic patterns, validate my own feelings, and reinforce my boundaries. I understand now that their behavior wasn't necessarily born of pure malice, but likely from their own unresolved issues, their own discomfort with vulnerability and difficult emotions. But understanding the root cause of their behavior doesn't excuse the impact it had on me, and it doesn't mean I have to continue subjecting myself to it. Compassion for their struggles doesn't require me to sacrifice my own well-being. Setting boundaries isn't about being cruel or unloving. It's about defining where you end and others begin. It's about saying, I love you, but I won't allow myself to be treated in a way that harms me. It's an act of self-preservation and self-respect. And sometimes, tragically, setting those boundaries means the relationship dynamic changes in ways you didn't want, leading to distance or even estrangement. That's a painful consequence, but for me, it was a necessary one for my healing and growth. The peace I have gained is invaluable. The journey from pain to purpose is not linear. There are setbacks, moments of doubt, lingering sadness. But there is also immense strength, clarity, and a deep sense of authenticity that I wouldn't trade for anything. I am no longer the girl who shrinks, hides her feelings, and believes she is too much. I am a woman who knows her worth, trusts her intuition, and uses her voice, even when it's hard. And my hope is that by sharing my story, I can encourage even one person to question the narrative they've been given about themselves, to trust their own feelings, and to find the courage to speak their truth, no matter how much drama others accuse them of creating. Your feelings are valid, your pain is real, and your truth is worth fighting for. It might just lead you to your purpose, too. Thank you for listening to my story. It means the world to me to be able to share it with you. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've faced similar challenges with being dismissed or invalidated by family, please share your experience in the comments below. Let's build a community of support and understanding. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about healing, boundaries, and finding strength in your own truth. Thank you again.